Thanks so much, everyone, for staying with us right here on the special edition of Politics Today on China's television. It's a continued coverage of Ekiti governorship election. It's the eve of the election. Our attention is being on security, and we will continue. I'm now being joined by the Executive Director of Impact Initiative, Mr. Bukola Idowu, to give us an understanding on their documentation reporting and how to mitigate election violence. They've done a pre-election security analysis, and Mr. Idowu is here for us live to give us an understanding. Thanks so much, Mr. Idowu, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
How have you been?
Fine, fine. It's good to be here again.
So you've been on the ground with you and your colleagues at Impact?
Yes, we've been on the ground, let me say, for the past 6 months.
Wow.
Yes, but we came fully. We've been on the ground monitoring the pre-election environment in terms of election security and those risk factors that we have been able to identify. And then we also came in fully on ground now, and we are here till after the elections.
Interesting. Let's jump right into it. I know your organization has done a tremendous work in mapping and doing a pre-election observation and analyzing the situation. Let's get into your security mapping that you have done. First, you are looking at the total number of incidents versus the resulting fatalities, and you've done a real good job in trying to give us a graphical representation of the total incident and the total fatalities. What did you discover?
So basically, one of the things we have done is that we started tracking since October last year, and one of the things we have seen in terms of violence is that the violence in Ekiti looks dynamic in a way that you have criminal activity and then you have election violence. However, both of them run parallel. There is no place of convergence between both of them. And this is what I mean. When you see criminal case that happen, maybe kidnapping, it has nothing to do with election violence. It has nothing to do with the election. But election violence also happened on its own. But to put numbers to it, we've been able to document 15 cases of election violence and 2 cases of fatality. And that is since October 2025 till June, till date. And that is what we have been able to identify. However, that is election violence. But we know that election violence is different from general violence, non-electoral violence.
Day-to-day criminality.
Day-to-day criminal activity.
Yeah.
But day-to-day criminal activity is also almost the same as it is, but with a higher magnitude of impact that we have seen in terms of banditry, also in terms of kidnapping. So
there's been kidnapping in the state?
Of course, there have been kidnapping in the state, basically 2 local governments, Ikole and then Moba local government, and interestingly, those 2 states border Kwara and Kogi. So we have that in that particular axis.
So the non-electoral violence, you've identified 11 and 1 fatality in that.
Yes.
And so there are more activities or more violence and fatality in election related in the last 6 months. That should give us concern.
Yeah, it should give us concern.
That if the normal day-to-day violence or crime is less in number to election-related, that means that the police or security agencies need to really sharpen their lenses and ensure that they do not...
Absolutely, because you see, when it comes to election violence, is periodic. You know, it comes during that time of election, and that is why it could come in full force. It could come in a higher magnitude, and that is one of the things we have seen. Then again, electoral violence also move. When you look at the graph of election violence, most times it moves higher when the electoral event gets nearer. So what am I trying to say? You can see the graph growing when you are moving towards party primaries, for instance, and then when you are moving towards the commencement of campaign, now it can come down, but when you now begin to move closer to the election day, it keeps going up. And basically, it's something to call for concern for.
So you've done the mapping, and if you look at it, you've done it based on the map. You've shown us electoral violence dominant local government areas, the non-electoral violence, criminal dominant local government area, then the balance, the mix of the threat profile. And Ikole seems to be, and Maba seems to be in the red. These areas are prone to this violence from the mapping and the data you have shown.
Absolutely. So that is what the data is saying, because when you look at the factors that we have to look at, there are about 5 factors we put in place, and well, 6 electoral pressure factors that we put in place in terms of the presence of criminal activity, in terms of the possibility of the potential of INEC operational lapses. Then we also look at the actual history of violence in that particular place. You look at the critical factor in terms of possibility of intimidation and coercion. And then you also look at things around what we call, I think in the last presentation, we talked about the battleground. And the battleground is not battleground because a politician come from, or a contestant come from that particular place. You have to look at the number of votes they carry in that particular place. You have to look at the number of registered voters, then PVC collected. You also have to look at in terms of the previous voter turnout in that particular place. For instance, when you look at the map, Ado is a bit moderate, because one of the things you are going to see is that when you come to turnout, Ilejemeje that have more registered vote, little or the least registered voter in the previous election have higher turnout. And so we are now going to look at what exactly do we put in place. But so when you put most of these factors in place, then MOBA and the Equality stand at a high risk, very, very high risk area.
Let's look at the trend of violence. And one thing that comes out to me is that in March, there is a spike. Yeah. What do you think is the reason for the spike in terms of the trend of the electoral violence?
So when you look at that March, that is the time that you have party primaries.
Oh.
So you have party primaries March and April, and then, so it is not the governorship party primaries, but the party primaries around the State House of Assembly, party primaries around senatorial election, senatorial seats, House of Rep, the National Assembly, then the presidential, don't forget the presidential primary was also like a direct primary. So you have more electoral activity in Ekiti, that
around
March.
That period.
Yeah.
And that's, so we look at the trend of the non-electoral violence, and it was in October and December that we saw a spike, and there is a trend that subsists from January up until now. Yeah. But every other month, there seems to be one violence or the other.
So that tells you that, look, so when you look at from that October to December, one of the things you see is that around that time, those are the times at which kidnapping took place, the time at which some bandits came in and disallowed some farmers to do their work. And in fact, as we speak now, there are still people in them that were kidnapped in a particular local government at a church, and they are still, recently they came out to protest. So that was the time. But however, 1, 2, 3 incidents around that particular time. Mm-hmm. Now, it looked like attention has been drawn to the state, and then security agencies also beef up their activity a little bit. So you now see it going flat. And that is what we have seen.
Give us an understanding, the records of the electoral violence across the LGA. Is there something we need to be worried about in Ado Ekiti, which is seeing more of, and it seems about 80% of the entire violence that we're seeing in the entire state?
What this data is telling us is that to date, this is the situation of things. That it's this is what has been happening. The total number of election violence, Ado Ekiti carried the highest, of it.
And two people died.
2 people died
in that incident.
So, but the other question is this, because you may not also, and that way, if you look at the map too, Ado Ekiti was not also posed as a hotspot area, But because on election day, as we move closer to the election, of course, when you look at the police deployment, we've seen their men on ground, and I think the CP also said it. Now, those drone command center, the DSS, the civil defense, all of them, they are in Ado. And so one of the things you're going to see on election day is that, okay, the place might be a little bit peaceful, because of the magnitude of the deployment you are going to see at that state capital, But the major point is you have to now look at those border towns.
Yeah.
You have to look at some of those places identified. But when you look at what the record is saying, then, we said, 15 electoral violence. That's just to tell you that 80% of them happen in Ekiti.
But, I mean, even the non-electoral violence, Ekiti seems to be, and the usual suspect, Moba, Ikole, they're there.
Yeah.
Ekiti is still carrying the day with a more fatality, more violence. Yeah. Even these are non-electoral violence more than the rest of the local government areas.
Yeah, so and when you look at non-electoral violence, is the violence, and we are not talking about, just election alone, but when you look at in terms of the numbers of non-electoral violence. So, for instance, riot, mob attack, and some other stuff, you still have more in the city center. And that is one of the things that should worry us. Yeah. And at the same time, because we are even saying, you are going to have a more deployment in Ekiti, that still does not tell us that we should fold our hands, because it's a fragile piece.
Who are the perpetrators of this violence? What is the data telling us?
So when you look at electoral violence, then you have perpetrators to be party members, you have party thugs, and then you also have hoodlums, and then those are the kind of people that perpetrate the electoral violence. More the party thugs, the party members, and then you also have those hoodlums. Now, this is disaggregated in a way that, look, party members are actually different from the party thugs, because you need to look at the difference. For the mere fact that I come to vote as a member of this particular party, and then something happened, I decided to start fighting, then that does not still categorize you as a party thug. But these party thugs are the people that even have gone a bit higher to commercialize their activity. So they are like a mercenary that you can actually call and say, hey, go and disrupt that place. The opposition is winning in that particular place. So when you look at those kind of things, but at the same time, when you merge it together, if you decide not to separate it and put party members and the party talk together, is still the political class that perpetrates more of the electoral violence.
And the victims are usually civilians,
of course,
of which we're seeing 11 people that have been affected. Yeah. Victims of the electoral violence, party members, they kill themselves.
Yes.
But for the kind of, or the forms of electoral violence, you've identified different property destruction, intimidation, physical assault, harassment, kidnapping, and the rest.
So that tells you why Ekiti also look like they carry more of that in terms of that form of violence, because property destruction is a form of violence, intimidation, physical assault, harassment. These are the form of violence we have documented in Ekiti. Of course, murder, shooting, and then protest and verbal assault, including cyber attack. These are all nation of what we have seen. There are people you even find online, that they do this most of this, cyber attack. Most especially, some of them, you call them data boys. They just go out to the extent that they can use misogynic languages. They can harass anybody, online. So these are all forms of violence when it comes to an election. And we have recorded most of these for the past 6 months.
Yeah, in that 6 months, we have also seen the different forms of the non-electoral violence. Yeah. But I'm also quite intrigued what you did with the electoral pressure profile, where you've color-coded the local government and what one needs to look at. But the pre-election hotspot map is interesting. Can you explain what exactly the pre-election hotspot map, the color code, and what these, how you came about?
Okay, so when you look at the electoral pressure map, which we can't display now, maybe for some reasons, now, it breaks each of the components. There are about 6 components there. You see the criminal, the political, the operational, the information, and the cohesive and social. Now, those things are disaggregated. So in that pressure map, one of the things we have done is to say, look, when you are looking at coerciveness, when you are looking at intimidation, these are places
that you need to watch out for.
Watch out for. However, when you now look at that map, the pressure map is now to pull everything together and say, hey, look, when you pull everything together, represent it in map. As you can see, look at the pressure map. When you look at it in terms of criminal, mobile is leading. In terms of political is high. In terms of operational is medium. Information disorder is medium. Coerciveness is high. And then when you look at the social, it's medium. So when you look at put everything together, you come to that map that now shows mobile, still the high risk area. When you now look at the color coding, you look at Ikole, very high in terms of that pressure. And that is one of the things you need to see. But of course, there are places like Ekiti, Southeast, Gbonyi, and Iserun. Most of these places are a bit, are going to, less hotspot as we can see.
Mr. Bukalaido, we thank you for this work. Now, it gives us an idea of what to watch out for and what security agencies to do or what they need to do more. Even the voters need to now start thinking of where to move to, where not to go, and what to do. But thanks so much indeed, Mr. Bukalaido, the Executive Director of Kimpart Development Initiative. Thanks so much indeed. I appreciate
Thank you so much.
Hope to see you tomorrow after all of the work. Let's see what of this mapping.
We now need to assess.
Absolutely.
The police have deployed, so let's now assess the deployment.
The deployment and all of what they said is going to do.